Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Hernandez. I am a student at the University of Connecticut. In today's podcast, I would like to explore how notions of citizenship are incorporated and negotiated in LGBTQ plus activism and the wider community. I will look at the work of 7 scholars who have researched this particular question through interviews and engagement with the intersection between immigrant and LGBTQ plus activism. Ultimately, I want to know how folks come out of the undocumented and LGBTQ plus closets. First, it's important to understand the unique circumstances of identifying as both a non-citizen and an LGBT person. A new identity has emerged since 2011 that aims to capture this unique experience, UndocuQueer. Maria Pieri from the University of Coimbra in Portugal explains how the raison d'être of LGBTQ plus activism and undocumented activism are fundamentally alike. And I quote Maria, "Undocumented activism challenges citizenship as it brings unexpected bodies at the center of debate. In this sense, if we consider queer politics as practices of contestation and creation of alternatives to normativization and categorization, the condition of invisibility from which they are founded on appears akin to the one from which undocumented claims spring." End quote. It is clear from Pieri's remarks that citizenship is a norm in society, so undocumented persons live in the shadows or in the closet where they are violating a societal norm. Additionally, there is almost nothing individuals can do insofar as they can control the circumstances that affect their ability to comply with citizenship norms. For example, a young teenager from Guatemala who is forced to leave their home and flee to the United States has little control over how to join American society through a legal pathway. Our immigration system has simply not accounted for that experience. Moreover, immigration has been criminalized, even though it is a natural behavior that has been recurring throughout human history and that we see in other species. Similarly, society has not accounted for LGBTQ plus individuals, and their behaviors have been criminalized, forcing them into a closet. So how do we get to a point where undocumented voices are heard in LGBTQ plus spaces? Pieri offers some insight from her research, and she says, and I quote, "In first place, UndocuQueers and the cultural contribution produced within it are without any doubt a specific product of their space and time. The convergence of the DREAM Act discussion, the cultural resources of the young activist involved in a political debate on undocumented status born in the USA years ago are significant elements which created the basis for the emergence of the movement." Pieri also focuses her remarks on art that has been created to guide discourse on the UndocuQueer experience. In her work, she analyzes the web series Undocumented and Awkward, which highlights how simple things such as a driver's license and using it as a form of ID can expose an undocumented status and create awkward situations for individuals. Jesus Cisneros and Julia Gutierrez offer a similar definition of undocuQueer identification, and I quote, "UndocuQueer as a political identity specifically addresses intersectional oppression and serves as a mode through which to question the processes that create and maintain exclusionary norms. Undocu refers to the nativist policies that criminalize immigrants, whereas queer captures the heterogeneity and plurality of gender and sexuality. Together, UndocuQueer acknowledges the queer and trans identities of many undocumented immigrants who have been previously marginalized within social movement organizing." End quote. This definition takes into account how normativity plays a role in how immigrants identify. Cisneros and Bracho also see UndocuQueer as an empowering political statement. Normativity usually enforces a binary, such as male, female, gay, straight, and citizen, non-citizen. Within the context of immigration, there is a binary between good and bad immigrants, which has allowed for the criminalization of migration and the narrative of the good and bad immigrant. Melissa Autumn White from McGill University explores this issue through the deportation story of Álvaro Orozco and Julio Salgado, and their collaborative I Am UndocuQueer project. Autumn White looks at the context that is disseminated in support of Alborough by analyzing people's testimonies in favor of letting him stay, and she identifies three themes: migrant exceptionalism, state benevolence, and citizenship for all. Perhaps the most relevant of these frameworks is migrant exceptionalism. This is a narrative that Autumn White describes as a, quote, explicit tactic of these testimonial excerpts, which is to depict the hardworking, energetic community builder whose efforts augment forms of self-sufficiency among marginalized subjects. Far from threatening to the current order, such attributes of self-reliance can be readily assimilated within the logic of the nation-state, given their capacity to sustain the population, even as the state redirects resources away from shared investments like public health, education, and social welfare. I have personally experienced these broad narratives and how they frame immigrant stories and how we interact with society. As someone who speaks English fluently and otherwise fulfills attributes that we associate with the average American citizen, I have perceived people's full acceptance into society. In fact, Edgar Sandoval from the University of Washington sums up my experience in one of his academic writings, and I quote, "The dreamer's trope has become central within political debates around immigration justice because of its attractiveness to a range of political actors within political institutions and grassroots organizations, as this trope primarily draws on narratives about youth who crossed the border from Mexico to the U.S. as children, worked hard in school, earned good grades, and now seek documentation to attend college. We have seen many organizations and young leaders push against these narratives and give the narratives back to dreamers. For example, organizations such as United We Dream, Connecticut Students for a Dream, and Familia, Trans Queer Liberation Movement, are led by UndocuQueer young leaders. It is incredible to see that at the intersection of queer and undocumented identities, we see a place of strength, activism, and resilience. I have personally been in those spaces, and I have felt inspired to see empowered UndocuQueer leaders. They have created safe spaces where UndocuQueer folks can come out of the shadows and be their full selves. Even though safe spaces for UndocuQueer folks exist all over the country as a result of years of activism, there are still many spaces that remain unsafe to disclose an UndocuQueer identity. Some of them include the home, friend circles, workspaces, and even school. Jesus Cisneros and Cristian Bracho conduct a study where they determined that, and I quote, coming out as UndocuQueer challenges the concepts of social acceptability within LGBT and immigrant rights frameworks that rely on norms of cisgender heterosexuality and are built on a discourse of exceptionalism and privatized notions of citizenship. Not only are UndocuQueer folks dealing with how society and the immigrant narrative will accept their identity, but also how their families will react. Since undocumented immigrants rely heavily on family networks of support to secure housing, work, and education needs, they are often faced with the difficult decision of hiding their queer identity from their family members. Cisneros and Bracho's study directly answers the inquiry guiding this podcast. How do folks come out of the undocumented and LGBTQ plus closets? They do it in different ways. According to the study, UndocuQueer folks disclose their identity strategically. They do this because when revealing their identities, they take into account their social, family, work, and political context. The mechanism that makes all of this possible is fear. Fear of detention, deportation, rejection, and discrimination. As Cisneros and Bracho put it, and I quote, undocumented immigrants are relegated to the margins of society and form part of a permanent underclass without legal protections or often the opportunity to become incorporated. The findings of their study reveal the ways the closet resembles the shadows, and that both provide protection from the outside world, yet neither are considered suitable places for sustaining life. Such discordance is further complicated at the intersection of gender, sexuality, and immigration status, as UndocuQueer immigrants must navigate the simultaneous pressures of the closet and the shadows. The closet and the shadows. That is where society has hidden UndocuQueer communities, even as they work in our workspaces, study in our schools, and become our friends. Yet we do not recognize their full identities and create shadows and causes of fear. As this brief study has shown, it is no longer a question of how UndocuQueer folks come out of the shadows, but when. And when they do, they make our wider community safer and stronger because they are no longer living in fear. They can be their true selves. They can accomplish things such as pushing the Obama administration to create the DACA program, Connecticut to pass the Afford to Dream Act, and countless other legislative victories. The greatest victory, however, will always be coming out of the undocumented shadows and the closet.